that allows for it. But people have self-transcending experiences, and people have the best day of their life where everything seemed, they seemed at one with nature. Sure. And for that, because religion seems to be the only game in town in talking about those experiences and dignifying them, that's one reason why I think it seems to be taboo to criticize it, because you're talking about the most important moments in people's lives and trashing them, at least from their view.
Well, I don't have to agree with you, Sam, in order to say that it's a very good thing you're saying that sort of thing, because it shows that, as you say, religion is not the only game in town when it comes to being spiritual. It's like it's a good idea to have somebody from the political right who is an atheist, because otherwise there's a confusion of values which doesn't help us, and it's much better to have this diversity in other areas. I mean, I think I sort of do agree with you, but even if I didn't, I think it was valuable to have that.
Right. If one could make one change, and only one, mine would be to distinguish the numinous from the supernatural.
Yes.
Right. You had a marvelous quotation from Francis Collins, the genome pioneer, who said, while mountaineering one day, he was just overcome by the landscape, and then went down on his knees and accepted Jesus Christ. A complete non sequitur. It's never even been suggested that Jesus Christ created that landscape.
Right. A frozen waterfall in three streams.
Three parts.
Which would be the mind of the Trinity.
Well, yeah, absolutely. We're all triune in one way or another. We're programmed for that. That's very clear. It wouldn't ever have been a four-headed God.
Right.
You know that from experience. But that would be an enormous distinction to make, and I think it would clear up a lot of people's confusion that what we have in our emotions, that the surplus value of our personalities, the bits that aren't particularly useful for our evolution, or that we can't prove are, but that do belong to us all the same, don't belong to the supernatural and are not to be conscripted or annexed by any priesthood.
Yes, it's a sad fact that people, in a sense, won't trust their own valuing of their numinous experiences. They think it isn't really as good as it seems unless it's from God, unless it's in some kind of a proof of religion. No, it's just as wonderful as it seems. It's just as important. It is the best moment in your life, and it's the moment when you forget yourself and become better than you ever thought you could be in some way, and see in all humbleness the wonderfulness of nature. That's it, and that's wonderful. But it doesn't add anything to say, golly, that has to have been given to me by somebody even more wonderful.
It's been hijacked, hasn't it?
It's also, I'm afraid, I think it's a deformity or shortcoming in the human personality, frankly, because the religion keeps stressing how humble it is, and how meek it is, and how accepting, and almost to the point of self-abnegation is. But actually it makes extraordinarily arrogant claims for these moments. It says that I suddenly realized that the universe was all about me.
Yes.
And felt terrifically humble about it. Come on, we can laugh people out of that, I believe.
Right.
Yeah. Also, and I think we should. I am so tired of the if only Professor Dennett had the humility to blah, 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 and humility, and this from people of breathtaking arrogance. I think
I shove one aside, saying, "Just don't mind me. I'm on an errand for God."
Yeah, right.
Well, this is a
how
point.
modest is that?
This is the point. I think we should return to this notion of the arrogance of science, because there's no discourse which enforces humility more rigorously. I mean, scientists, in my experience, are the first people to say they don't know. I mean, if you get a scientist to start talking off his area of specialization, he or she immediately starts hedging his bet, saying, I'm not sure, but I'm sure there's someone in the room who knows more about this than me, and of course, all the data's not in. I mean, this is the mode of discourse in which we are most candid about the scope of our ignorance.
Well, actually, a lot of academics come up with that kind of false modesty. But I do know.
Well, yes, it is.
Many's the historian who says, "No, I yield." It's just someone.
No, but any academic should do that.
Yes, they should.
The thing about religious people is that they recite the Nicene Creed every week, which says precisely what they believe. There are three gods, not one. The Virgin Mary, Jesus died, went to down for 3 days, and then came up again. In precise detail. And yet they have the gall to accuse us of being overconfident, and not knowing what it is to doubt.
And I don't think many of them ever let themselves contemplate the question which I think scientists ask themselves all the time: what if I'm wrong?
Yeah.
What if I'm wrong? I mean, it's just not part of their repertoire.
Actually, would you mind if I disagree with you about that? I mean, a lot of the talk that makes religious people hard to, not hard to beat, but hard to argue with, is precisely that they'll say they're in a permanent crisis of faith. There is indeed a prayer, Lord, I believe, help thou my unbelief. Graham Greene says the great thing about being a Catholic was that it was a challenge to his unbelief. A lot of people live by keeping two sets of books. In fact, it's my impression.
There is that.
It's my impression, in fact, that a majority of the people I know who call themselves believers or people of faith do that all the time. I wouldn't say it was schizophrenia. That would be rude. But they're quite aware of the implausibility of what they say. They don't act on it when they go to the doctor or when they travel or anything of this kind. But in some sense, they couldn't be without it. But they're quite respectful of the idea of doubt. In fact, they try and build it in when they can.
Well, that's interesting then. And so when they are reciting the creed with its total sort of apparent conviction, is this a kind of mantra which is forcing themselves to overcome doubt by saying, yes, I do believe, I do believe, I do believe, because really I don't.
And of course, like the others, like the secular counterparts, they're glad other people believe it. It's an affirmation they wouldn't want other people not to be making.
Well, also there's this curious bootstrapping move, which I tried to point out in this recent On Faith piece. This idea that you start with the premise that belief without evidence is especially noble. I mean, this is the doctrine of faith. This is the parable of doubting Thomas. And so you start with that, and then you add this notion, which has come to me through various debates, that the fact that people can believe without evidence is itself a subtle form of evidence. I mean, we're kind of wired to, actually Francis Collins, you mentioned, brings this up in his book. The fact that we have this intuition of God is itself some subtle form of evidence. And this is kind of kindling phenomenon where once you say it's good to start without evidence, the fact that you can is a subtle form of evidence, and then the demand for any more evidence is itself a kind of corruption of the intellect or a temptation or something to be guarded against, and you get a kind of perpetual motion machine of self-deception where you can get this thing up and running.
But they like the idea that it can't be demonstrated, because then there'd be nothing to be faithful about.
Right.
That's the point of faith. If everyone had seen the resurrection, and we all knew that we'd been saved by it, so then we would be living in an unalterable system of belief, and it would have to be policed.
Right. Well,
and it would actually be, those of us who don't believe in it are very glad it's not true, because we think it would be horrible. Those who do believe it don't want it to be absolutely proven so there can't be any doubt about it, because then there's no wrestling with conscience, there are no dark nights of the soul.
It was a review of one of our books, I don't remember which, but it was exactly that point, that just, what a crass expectation on the part of atheists that there should be total evidence for this. I mean, there'd be much less magic. You know, if everyone was compelled to believe by too much evidence. Actually, this is Francis Collins. I'm sorry. This is Francis
a friend of mine, Canon Fenton of Oxford, actually, said that if the church validated the Holy Shroud of Turin, he personally would leave the ranks, because if they were doing things like that, he didn't want any part of it.
Right.
I didn't expect when I started off my book tour to be as lucky as I was. I mean, Jerry Falwell died in my first week on the road. That was amazing.
Yes, that was amazing luck.
I didn't expect Mother Teresa to come out as an atheist. Yes. But reading her letters, which I now have, it's rather interesting. She writes, I can't bring myself to believe any of this. She tells all her confessors, all her superiors, I can't hear a voice, I can't feel a presence, even in the Mass, even in the sacraments, no small thing. And they write back to her saying, that's good. Right. That's great, you're suffering. It gives you a share in the crucifixion. It makes you part of Calvary. You can't beat an argument like that.
Right.
The less you believe it, the more you're an illustration.
The more you prove it's true.
Yes, and the struggle, the dark night of the soul is the proof in itself. So we just have to realize that these really are non-overlapping magisteria. We can't hope to argue with a mentality of this kind.
But we can do just what you're doing now, and that is, we can say, look at this interesting bag of tricks that have evolved. notice that they're circular, that they're self-sustaining, that they don't have any, that they could be about anything.